All right, so welcome back, everybody. This is the best segment of the day. JK, not JK. This is going to be my favorite part. This is the mental health panel that we have been so hopefully heavily pushing out on social media. We're going to be talking about Moon Knight, specifically, very importantly, only about the show that came out via Marvel and Disney Plus. Those 6 lovely episodes. We are not talking about the 40 plus years of comics because we have some people who were newly introduced to the topic and we weren't giving them 40 years of comics to read and memorize. So, Moon Knight episodes only specifically, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So, we are going to do this in a very lax style where all of our lovely guests, who I will introduce in a moment, are going to be talking about various aspects of dissociative identity disorder and how that applies to Moon Knight. We're going to be going through what is DID or dissociative identity disorder, what are the aspects of the brain that are associated with this, and then the relationships and behaviors, all of which we are tying back into Moon Knight. So, without further ado, let us talk to our favorite people. Let's start with everyone's favorite because you've been hyped up all day on this stream. Erin, hi. Say
Hi.
hello.
Hello.
This is Erin's our favorite person ever, so we always have to go with Erin. Abby's our second favorite person within the ILF now, newly joining us. So Abby, please say hello to everyone.
Hello.
Thank you. And then our new favorite guest ever is Dr. John Luke, aka known as Dr. Goku. I don't know what name we're going to use more today. Probably Dr. Goku.
It rolls off the tongue better.
It really does. I like
the
saying
imagery is good. Yeah. And we know that Erin does because Erin talks about you all of the time.
Well, thank you.
We want you to come back all of the time.
Yep.
So just a few more things before we get started. For everybody in the chat, please, if you have any questions at any point throughout this, pop them in the chat. I'll be watching. The mods will be watching. They can get them to me as well. We are going to have a Q&A section at the end. So we're going to go over those questions and some others that we've gotten before the stream actually started. So pop those into the chat. That includes mods. If you guys have questions as well, pop them in. And at the end, I'll bring those back. In the meantime, I'm going to step back and let you guys all talk, and I'll pop in once in a while with some questions and some ideas, and we'll see where it goes. But who would like to give an idea about who Moon Knight is? I can do it, but I think it'd be more interesting if it came from you guys.
Oh.
I can do a small spiel about Moon Knight if you all want.
Do it.
Yes. Get started.
So again, we're doing the Disney Plus version of Moon Knight rather than the comics one because comics are complicated
and long.
So assume Moon Knight as a character is mainly Mark Spector, who is a Jewish mercenary. So he used to be in the army and a mercenary that serves the moon god Khonshu. So he is tasked as his avatar on Earth to provide justice. Yes, I see a hand.
Moon god of what? Where does this moon god come from?
So he's the Egyptian
yes
moon god.
That plays pretty heavily, at least.
Yeah,
so
a lot of Egyptian
the big
history.
thing. Yeah, so the big thing with Moon Knight is based on like Egyptian mythology. So that's where Mark and Moon Knight get all of their powers is through Khonshu. The point of the story and within the character is that at first in the comics, it was believed that he was schizophrenic, but later it was deemed that he suffers from DID, so dissociative identity disorder, where he has multiple personalities. So we meet 3 of them in the show, one of them super briefly that we'll talk about. So we see Mark and we see Steven. And we see them go through their quest to stop Arthur Harrow, which is the former avatar for Khonshu, whereas now he's serving Ammit, which is kind of the god of, was it god of death and choosing who dies. I don't remember exactly what it was, because Khonshu is
Yeah,
vengeance and doling
if
out
you were going
vengeance.
to ultimately be a bad person, that was the judgment.
Yeah.
Kind of like a justice. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
So we're gonna
if
do
you were to
minority
do-
report precognition type of thing.
Yeah.
if you're
If
going
you-
to do badly.
Even if you're like 5
Which
and you're
stirred up
judged that you're
exactly
going to do
which
something badly.
stirred up that children would die, essentially, if that
Yep.
was the way.
Yep.
So as a whole, that is the story, but mainly it's more
summary.
of a character study
Mhm.
on Mark and Steven.
Yes.
Spoiler
Less of a Moon Knight
alerts.
story, more of a character study on Mark and Steven.
If it isn't blatant already for anybody watching, spoiler alerts.
Yes. Oh, yes. I think it's also important, and I kind of wanted to do a little, education as we get started before we kind of really go into it, because DID is very complex. It's a very complex, serious mental health disorder, and it is super rare. It affects about 1% or 1.5% of the population. Ironically, it is super hyped up in social media and everywhere else. I feel like the more unknown something is, our society tends to gravitate towards that and get fascinated and highlight it. But it is actually very, very rare. And believe it or not, it takes almost 7 years in the mental health treatment world to get a true diagnosis. And part of that is because it overlaps with so many other mental health diagnoses, which we'll go into later, but including schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder. They overlap some of the features, and therefore they could be misdiagnosed for years and years and years. But I think the one thing I want to drive home today personally, I believe you guys would as well, is that it is very rare. It is extremely rare, and it is developed from prolonged and extreme abuse, usually in childhood. So this is not something to throw around like, I have DID because, 1 minute I feel like this and the next I feel like a different person. It is extremely complex, and it even has diagnostic criteria, and not to bore the audience, but I do feel like it's important for me to kind of just go over those quickly to let you know what it would look like to be officially diagnosed by a therapist to have this. We have in the therapy world a DSM-5 book. It's like our therapy Bible, if you will. It's how we diagnose people. And and so therefore, I just want to read some of the things that if you were to walk in a therapist's office, you would need to meet these things before they would even say you have DID, on top of many sessions of getting to know you. But you have to have at least 2 or more identities. So that's at minimum, that you have to have at least 2 of those. And basically they have to be enduring the pattern of perceiving that you basically are, in your environment itself. Amnesia, believe it or not, is actually a criteria. So you have to actually have those like blackout moments. The person must be distressed by the disorder. And you see that often, I feel like in Moon Knight, you see literally a distressing moments as they switch or things of that, or then they discover the new person. That's a big part of it. It's actually also you have to make sure it's not part of a cultural or religious practice, believe it or not, because you never know why some people might have to shift for those. So you have to be very cognizant of that. And then the last thing really is you have to make sure it's not due to substance abuse or medical condition, because again, those could affect your brain, obviously, in many other ways. So again, those are like I said, I just wanted to give you a little education on what a diagnosis would look like. It really does require certain things and before an extensive knowledge, I think, of a certain therapist before you would get that diagnosis. So I just kind of went through that. Sorry,
Just on that as well, one of the reasons that it's so hard to diagnose is because it's to do with altered states of consciousness and distinct personalities.
Yep.
So each personality has different autobiographical memories. So each personality, when you diagnose, you go into someone's background, their memories, their feelings. Each personality has their own set.
Yep.
And because of the amnesia, they don't know that they're different. So it's really hard to diagnose, because if you've just got that one, what they call alter, and that's the main one, unless the other one comes out, you're not going to know that there's a different set of memories, because that other person has no idea.
Yep. And that's evidenced in Moon Knight when he's, supposedly in the psychiatrist's office. And if he were to just walk in there as Mark and have a full hour session as just Mark, that was Mark. You know, yet another
Yeah,
day come in
and
and
we'd be
see
looking
it.
at something different or
Absolutely.
a different presenting ideology. And you mentioned the
Exactly.
DSM-5 TR because we're on TR now.
TR.
But the criteria are synonymous kind of throughout the world because the ICD has basically the exact same diagnostic criteria as the DSM, which is the two or more presenting personalities or distinct personalities. There are like patterns of experiencing that are different, altered states of consciousness. All of these markers are the same. So it has been something that it has been studied, but it's also been understudied.
Absolutely. I believe that too.
And there's still is this like dividing line within the scientific community of, is DID a real thing?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, you know, personally, they did a very good job. I've read tons of different articles about this, about people's opinions in the mental health field, how they view that Disney portrayed the ID. And I actually think they did a very good job. I mean, some of the things that were obvious to me is you wouldn't necessarily see somebody physically change as you see Mark and Steven do, where like he does the lookup and he like shifts. I don't think you would necessarily see that, but there are so many other things I think they did very, very well.
It's that visual marker.
Exactly. Well, the accent as well.
Yeah.
And that's another factor of the ID that is very important for people to know. You can have different voices acting, your posture, or, you know, your accents, your posture could be different. You see in it, he's a vegan, Steven's a vegan, Mark not so much. You know, there's just really, it's very, these alters obviously have very distinctly different aspects, you know, and I think they did a good job of showing that.
We also said before that we think they did a really nice job of showing the distress physically. They really represented the psychological distress physically. They used chains, so he would chain himself to his bed. So because he would lose his memory, so he was trying to keep himself physically restrained. And when you are suffering mental health, it can feel like a psychological prison.
Absolutely.
You don't understand how you're feeling, how you're behaving. It can be like I'm a prisoner in my own body. And I think they did such a good job of representing that with imagery. And I just thought the chains were a really good physical way to show that.
Yep. Even his apartment, as we were talking about before this, you know, it's very dungeon-like. It's very dark. It's very, you know, almost like a cave. Like, again, just keeping yourself as hidden as possible. Very representative. You know, tape on the door. Just all those little factors.
I thought that like how dark and dingy it was really done really well, because even watching it, you kind of felt a little bit unnerved.
Yes.
It felt very unnerving, and that in itself is a sign that something is going on with someone's mental health. When you see something very white and bright and open, it's the opposite. And they made it, even the apartment was small. It was small and cluttered as well.
So one thing that happened, and there was a small moment, what we are seeing is only Mark losing more of that control of the state of the altars in the past 2 or 3 months. So all of that distress or additional distress has only been going on for the past 2 or 3 months.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So imagine somebody enduring that for years and years and years, you know?
So there was a line in the show, and to me, it is the line that defines the show and the character. And it's when Arthur says, "Oh, this person is broken." And then they say, "I'm not broken. I just need help." And I believe a lot of people that have DID kind of feel this way, that they're a broken person because of what has happened to them. But in all reality, they are not a broken person. They are just someone that needs help. They're someone that has gone through tremendous amounts of trauma.
And you
and
could
they
see
need compassion and help.
absolutely, and you could see Layla throughout this series. I feel like shift. You know, she's very angry and confused at first, and then you could see almost towards the end there's just so much empathy in her. You know, where I think she even says to him at one point, we could work through this, we could have worked through this together. You know, and a very important aspect of people with DID is you need a very strong support system, because you know, those memory lapses and things of that nature, you need somebody that you can reach out to if you are, you know, somewhere where you don't recognize as you come to the main, let's say, person's reality. And it's a very scary, complex feeling. And so to have a very strong support network is very, very important. And I think that was, you know, Layla really portrayed that she would have stuck through to really try to help Mark through it.
Because the representation that they did in this show is very different. So it's a very different representation of DID as compared to other pieces of media that portray DID. So the two that I think about is Split with James McAvoy. Superb acting for McAvoy, but again, it was used as like a scare trope.
Yes.
So all people with DID are scary because of these things.
It has,
Or like Gollum in Lord of the Rings. It's kind of used in that way.
Yep.
And again, harking it back to that line, I'm not broken, I just need help, really shows the humanity and the compassion that they had for this character. So again, more so for the character study of Mark and Stephen rather than a full-blown Moon Knight portrayal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice point, because when TV shows or films like Split portray it as dangerous, it just heightens the stigma, because there is such a huge stigma that people with mental health concerns are dangerous and are more likely to commit crimes. And that's a concern anyway, because anything that is abnormal to us, we find threatening and frightening. So mental health naturally is something that we find very frightening because we don't fully understand it, because it's abnormal. So when we have TV shows that highlight that and say, oh, this person's suffering, this person has mental health, now they're dangerous, it just exacerbates that perception in the general public.
Yes, I agree. And they even said, I read something too, where they were saying that they were happy with how Disney didn't make it. If you notice, Mark having DID was not the plot. It was an aspect of the show, but it wasn't like, you know, with other shows, like it wasn't the plot, meaning, and this is a very important message to people, your diagnosis is part of you, but it doesn't equal you. It's not a whole, it's an aspect. And I think that was the other thing too. There was a whole show going on in dynamic and plot and all this Egyptian history and mythical things. And you know, the DID was part of it, not the whole thing. And again, I think that was really good for them to do, to show people you can do other things and live and thrive, and there's aspects of you, but it's not who you are.
And that calls that calls back to what Dr. Goku was saying about those movies, where that is more of the plot driven force and that scare factor.
Exactly. That's the reason the show is made. And I like that Disney Plus didn't do that. Like I said, they highlighted it and it obviously was very important, but it was not the whole thing.
And there was a push with diagnosing a few years ago as well. They changed the wording, because instead of being schizophrenic individuals, it's individuals with schizophrenia. They made a big push to separate the disorder from the individual, because we used to refer to people by their disorder.
Absolutely.
In old diagnostic manuals, they were diagnosed that way. But now it's not. We make a very big move to separate the individual from the diagnosis.
Absolutely.
One thing I liked about the show, it's one of the ways that they made it. So in most media, when you're introduced to a character, you get attached to that character first. And the host in the whole DID system is Mark.
Yeah.
But we don't meet Mark until the end of the first episode.
That was so interesting.
So we get attached to Steven. And throughout the entire show, we are attached to Steven because that's how our brains work. We're introduced to a character first, so that's the main character, not knowing that Steven is not the host of the system. He is an alter.
And that's interesting because that was brought up in another article I read, is that interestingly, usually the host is always aware of their alters, but alters are not aware of the host. And so that was a little bit unique in that Stephen was aware of Mark, when he became aware of Mark. But that's usually the case, is like, obviously the main person knows their alters, but not vice versa. So, but very good point. I think that was really cool, because I grew attached to Stephen. I loved Stephen. I really did. His quirks, everything about him, I thought he was hilarious. I even loved how cool was it that they had the 2 separate suits. They had 2 separate superhero suits, and Stevens was a literal suit. I mean, it just cracked me up. I really liked Stevens' character. I thought it was, obviously, Stevens' character served the purpose for Mark to be the childlike, kind, sweet person, and I adored him. So I really like his character.
So there was a couple moments, because Mark defines himself as a killer. So there's that scene at Khonshu's altar in the 5th episode that he believes that he is the one. So spoiler alert. So he believes he's the one that killed his brother. So right then is when he believes himself to be a killer at, I believe, 8 years old.
I think his
And
brother was 8 and
believes
he was
that.
a little older. But yeah.
So he would have been 10.
I think so, yeah.
So that's when he started to believe he was a killer. And his mom didn't really help that.
No.
And there was another question by like Dr. Harrow in that psychiatrist's office, where he asked if Stephen created Mark for vengeance to the world from his mom, or was Mark or Stephen created to hide from the awful things that he did in his life. And then we can tie in Jake Lockley, which is that 3rd altar, which is Jake is the one without the conscience. So we have these little bits and pieces in the story where Stephen and Mark said, I wasn't the one that did all of this violence, but someone did.
Yep.
But Khonshu uses Jake as that primary mode to deal out his vengeance, while still making Mark believe he's the one serving Khonshu.
Yep. Yeah, that in particular, what really jumps to my head, there was a scene on a roof, and it was 3 people versus Stephen and Mark, and they were going back and forth, and then they essentially both black out, and they wake up to they're dead, and it's like, there's a couple scenes like that, and they're both looking at each other or kind of talking like, well, I didn't do it, it's and like you said, it really alludes to it. There's also a scene in the psychiatric ward where, if you notice, there are these like mummy type coffins, if you will, that are people are banging on them, and there's a 3rd person banging, trying to get out. It just
so
has
I do believe that is Jake.
subtle, me too. There's these subtle, cool 3rd person references throughout it, but you really, you have to really be in tune to pick those up.
And what they started to do towards the end as well, they started to get the 2 of them to become friends and protect each other.
Yes.
And I thought that was really nice,
Yeah,
because
I did too.
we create these, or the alters are created as a way of the brain to protect itself. They're not doing it for fun. It's there because something so awful has happened that the brain says, my person needs to survive. I need to keep myself safe. So the alters are there because it's the last resort. It's so rare, it's not common. It's when something so extreme has happened that the brain goes, how am I going to save myself from this?
Yes.
So the alters, although they don't know that they're there, their whole function is to save the host, protect the host. And there's the confusion when they meet each other. There is a bit of like hesitancy towards each other and a bit of animosity. But then when they start to feel a bit of danger, they come together and they're looking after each other, and you can see when Mark, towards the end, when Mark is starting to realize something's going on and Stephen is trying to open that door, Mark is begging him not to. And really, again, it's such a good metaphor, because that's what it's doing. It's saying, please don't look at your pain. Please go to this altar, so the pain that you feel, you're protected from. And that's what he's trying to do. He's saying, Stephen, please don't open that door. Please don't open that door, because what's inside that door is going to hurt you, and it's going to hurt me, and we can't have that. So
And not even that, he's trying to protect Stephen. So there was that line,
yeah,
this is why you were created.
Yeah.
So Mark created Stephen as a way to keep the innocence of childhood,
Yes.
to have a mom that loves him, to have a mom that cares for him, as a way
Hence
for him
why-
to
yeah.
cope with the atrocities of the beating and the abuse that he had to endure from his mom. But I really like the scene where we do learn about Stephen's past and when Stephen was created, how he used one of the favorite movies him and his brother had. And the main character is called Stephen Grant. And he's British.
Mm-hmm.
So he pulled those influences to create that perfect childhood as a way to stay safe. Because mom blamed Mark for the death of his brother. And that's a guilt that Mark carried with him throughout his life. Even though he defined himself as a killer, we also see that he still has a conscience. So that there was that scene where they would see all of the people that Mark had killed.
Yes.
And he said he remembers every single one. But the one that was kind of still alive was his brother.
Yeah.
And in trauma work, one of the big things we say to people, it's when something happens and we're actually wanting to work on it, the brain wants to protect itself. It doesn't want to relive and re-feel that pain. So people feel as though they need to block it out. They create this barrier. Kind of makes it worse because the more you're avoiding, the more it's building up and the more it can kind of overflow. And one of the things that we often say is the heart part is already over. You lived through it.
Yep.
There's nothing we will be able to talk about while we are doing trauma work that is worse than having actually lived through the experience.
Yeah, and the power of that as well is, we can't push beyond the limits of the brain. So if the brain is saying you can't do something, no matter how psychologically strong you are, if the brain is saying, no, we won't do this, it's very hard to push through that. And when you go through trauma that is so severe, and some people are much stronger than others, and he's a young kid, he's not strong, he's not psychologically equipped to handle what he's gone through. So what the brain will do is it will go, how am I going to save this person? Because if we look at this pain, we're going to break down. So we have to get rid of the pain. So what you see in brain scans is areas of the brain that are responsible for identity. For example, the insula, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, because that's where our memories are. They will reduce activity. The brain will actually go into emotional shutdown, meaning it will go, I'm too overwhelmed to process the pain and the memory of this trauma. Therefore, I'm going to stop you being able to remember it whatsoever. And I'm going to stop you feeling whatsoever. And then what comes with that is really a loss of motivation too, at all, because you lose your feelings. Everything feels muted. And it can really lead to such negative self-images, but just such a lack of motivation to try and get better too, because you don't feel anything at an intensity enough that pushes you to. You just feel very dull and very just empty. And you can go on for such a long time, because what the brain will also do is shut down activation in areas that are responsible for self-referent information, meaning you're not self-processing and you're not having high self-awareness. So if you don't have self-awareness, you don't realize something is wrong. This is your normal. So that there's nothing inside of you saying you need to check in with yourself, because you're like, I'm not processing self-referent information anyway, so why would I? So it's a really, really complicated disorder, both psychologically and neurologically. It's got such distinct markers. And what I think is most fascinating, but also devastating, is that the brain is different. when we go through trauma in our childhood, it changes the way that the brain develops. So everybody, even though our brain communicates through neurons very differently, because everybody has a different firing and wiring pattern, we're all unique. We all have the same basic structure and functioning of each regions. You know, you look at a brain and you know what it should do. That's how we do neuroscience research. When someone has gone through severe emotional trauma, particularly at the early age of 0 to 3, where it's the critical development, what it does is it changes the way that the brain grows. And it leads to not just functional, but structural differences. So areas of the brain that are really essential to who we are, like things responsible for memory and identity processing, like the hippocampus, amygdala, insula, they change in volume. They change in volume, they change in structure. So now as you grow up, your memory is never going to be as fluid as everybody else's, because the ability for it to grow that way has been altered at such a young age. Now, there is positives to it. Doesn't mean that we're stuck that way forever. Therapy has, or research into therapy has shown that it can change the function of those brain regions. So you can't 100% reverse it, but there is light at the end of the tunnel when you seek therapy, because the brain is just so fantastic. The human brain is amazing in its ability to always change and grow. You know, there's a myth that it's only as when you're kids. The brain still changes when you're 60. You never lose neuroplasticity. It's not as quick and it's not as efficient. But over time, successful therapy, and I mean, you know, successful therapy, not reading incorrect information from blogs and TikTok and things like that, but when you have a really good therapist and they guide you in the right way, it can modify those brain regions to allow the communication and processing of information, which will allow those regions that have deficits to look more healthy again. Just like someone who is an alcoholic and has deficits in certain brain areas, when you stop drinking, after a certain amount of time, you can reactivate those areas and you can get rid of those deficits. You can with mental health as well. It's just, Erin, as you said, it's a very long process.
Yes,
You
very
said
long.
7 years just to identify.
Yes.
Imagine reversing that.
It's
Brain is
forever.
different.
And it's work. It's a lot. And I feel like, again, the show did a very good job of showing in the psychiatric, you know, in the psychiatrist's office, how draining physically, if somebody were to enter psychotherapy and do this work, it is so difficult and heavy. And you almost have to be in a place in your life where everything else is stable, because you are diving into such traumas of the past that you need a good support system with that to help you kind of manage all the other things. It's a lot. The other thing I wanted to point out, Abby, these were all such great points you're talking about, especially with the brain, because it's fascinating that is both neurological and mental health. But you saw in the show there were opportunities to intervene. And one of those was his father. His father was a loving, supportive man. You saw that. You saw him celebrate, I think it was his 8th or 10th birthday first, and then they fast forward 2 more years later, and it's just him and the father celebrating his 12th birthday. While his father looks like a very kind man to him, he had chances to intervene. And when I say that, addressing the mother, addressing her alcoholism, her own mental health problems, if he intervened and actually held her accountable to have to do things, that could have actually changed the course of Mark's complete life. And I think that was really important to note, because again, his father looked very kind in ways, but he did not intervene. And that would have been getting Mark therapy right away. That would have been, I mean, because there are ways, there's no way to cure DID, but there are definitely ways to prevent it. And that is definitely therapy soon after a trauma, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's another really good point about the dad. And there's a social learning aspect too.
Yes.
So as kids, especially, we learn by modeling behavior, and mostly off of our parents. They teach us how to understand the world. So we learn about relationships from their relationships. We learn about love from the way they love us, from the way they love each other. As a young kid, he's trying to figure out, Okay, what does the world look like? What's my future going to look like? How do I interact? When he's got a parent that's hurting him and another parent that is refusing to help, what he learns is no one's going to help me. So I think that really adds to why
Yep.
he goes into DID, because he's learned no one is going to save me. This is a man that is supposed to be my hero. You know, dads are heroes to kids.
Yep.
They're the protector, and he's not protecting him. So
Mm-mm.
when his brain is reviewing, okay, what do we do about this situation? It goes, well, I can't ask my dad. He's not going to save me. There is nobody that's going to save you, because he's learned that. So he goes, okay, well, the only option we have is to save ourselves. And he doesn't seek therapy. He doesn't seek help. And he's very resistant when he's getting the therapy later. He's so resistant to it. He refuses to accept he needs it. But he's learned that. He's learned nobody is going to help me. I'm the only person who is in charge of my own support. And I think that it's really sad, because kids, they model behavior.
Yep.
And research has shown just having even a teacher
Yeah.
step in, one person to say, do you need help? What's going on? Is everything okay at home? Just those simple questions, and someone offering support, somebody noticing, because he's also learning that he doesn't matter. He's learning that he's not important, because nobody is noticing this pain that he's going through, not even the people that are supposed to be there to protect him. So he kind of goes on about his life and he feels unimportant. And you can see that in the relationship that he has later on. For example, the first thing I noticed was the relationship he had with his boss. His boss is really demeaning to him. He talks about
Yeah.
things he cares about, and she's like, "Pff," and basically says you're not good enough. And you see him sink into himself, almost like, yeah, you're right, I'm not. And
Yeah,
you can see
because
that
he could have been that best tour guy there.
yes,
Absolutely.
yeah. And he just lets her speak to him that way, and you can see he just sinks into himself. And it's because he's learned, you're right, I don't matter, I'm not important, nobody really cares about me. And you feel so sorry for him. And I liked Stephen a lot, because you can see he's just in pain. You can see
Yeah.
he's lost. Even when you don't quite know that it's DID yet, you can see that he's just very lost in himself, and you can't help but just want to help him.
Yeah. I agree. Very vulnerable. He's very,
Yeah.
he's a very kind character. Absolutely.
What I liked is how they showed the elements of his birthday when Mark was a kid. Again, it showed how much his dad was trying to protect the mom and
Yeah.
Mark, but by being in the middle, not wanting to set anyone off. So being very passive. But by being passive, he's also enabling the behavior of abuse.
Very much.
So I think it was on his 11th birthday, mom didn't show up.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it just said, oh, it's just gonna be me and you. And it kind of just repeated that way the next year after. It was mom coming and being drunk and just blaming Mark still.
Yeah, and there's so much to be said about having a stable mother-father family home, because mothers and fathers fulfill roles emotionally that the other can't. Whether you are a male or a female child, having a mother and a father, really, it's so essential to the development, or at least a male and a female role model, because we do learn different things from them, because evolutionarily that's how we've grown so they fulfill aspects of our lives that we need. So when one of those aspects are missing or lacking, there is a core part of the emotional development that isn't fulfilled. And we see this in research when people are brought up in homes that only have one parent. It's really, really difficult, both for the child and the parent to fulfill those roles. So what is helpful is having another person, whether it is a teacher, whether it is a counselor, or a friend or family member that can help fulfill that role. So the child still gets that development, but you can see in Moon Knight's case, or Stephen and Mark's case, nobody is stepping in to fulfill that role. And then his dad also steps back from his role. So in losing his mum, he also loses the development that he needs from his father too.
Mhm.
So he's practically growing up in a parentless home, because an absent parent is worse than being taken out of that home and having a different figure supporting, because you do learn that this is how people interact with me. This is how people who love me show me love, by showing me nothing. And it just, again, it just adds to that feeling that he has of, I'm not important, so I've got to save myself.
Well, that's what happened as when he turned 18. As soon as he turned 18, he left home, joined
Yeah.
the military. And you could see the dad plead, don't go, don't go. She's going to go to therapy. She's going to stop drinking. But at that point, it had been
18.
close to a decade
Way too late.
of the abuse. And Mark at that point just said, no.
No, it's too much.
And his refusal to go to his mom's Shiva
Yes.
kind of speaks to how he was just done
Yeah.
with her.
Yep.
Which is completely different than what happened in the comics, but that's neither here nor there.
It's a whole other show.
I keep seeing the itch that you have on certain things, Dr.
This is why
Goku.
Dr. Goku's
This
gonna come back.
Oh, it's so many things in the comics, but in the show, it really gave that good moment. And at his mom's Shiva is when Mark lost control of the altars, because he had to relive all of those memories while he was being a mercenary. Yeah, he was still doing horrible things, but he wasn't being confronted to the abuse that he had as a child and everything that he had to endure. Being called back for him was kind of bittersweet. So yeah, she's gone, but it kind of brought this wave of emotion where, again, the brain just shut down to protect him. And we can see that switch. And then Steven coming back and is like, oh, I did it again, Mom, because he was able to have a mom that loved him, but being in the US and being confused as to where he is.
I thought they did a good job when it came to his emotional journey, because there is that emotional blunting, but then when there is a bit of realization, he is so emotionally overwhelmed and chaotic. He goes from blunt to chaos.
Yep.
And that is a really accurate but very good representation of what happens in the brain, because the areas of the brain that are responsible for emotional functioning, mostly areas of the brain within the limbic system, which is kind of the deepest areas of the brain, are most evolutionary early parts of the brain, and then areas, for example, the insula, which are a little bit further out. They're all affected by DID. There are several abnormalities with all of these regions. So when the brain is blunted, you don't really see that emotional chaos because there's nothing flowing through it. But then when he starts to kind of switch on to something's wrong here, that chaos really highlights the fact that he can't process his emotions. His brain is not processing emotions the way that it should do in a healthy individual, because it can't. For example, individuals with DID, they have different cortical volumes. So the volume of all of those regions are different. The thickness is different. The surface area is different. So it's not minor changes, huge changes. And all of these things occur with individuals who have suffered emotional trauma when they're really early. But when we have DID, it takes us away from those because, again, they're muted. So they're not going into the therapy early enough to kind of counteract that volume effect that is happening early on. So it's just getting worse and worse and worse, and it's building up, and then it gets to the point where there are such significant changes in the brain, so hard to unravel because it starts so early.
So there was a moment in that psychiatric hospital when Stephen wanted to go through the door that Mark didn't want him to go through.
That was
And he was
fascinating.
pleading with Stephen not to go, where he lost control, where he actually started to self-harm, started to hit himself because it was too much. And again, great on Oscar Isaac for playing that role like perfectly, where that was the moment where everything tipped. So you had to go through that pain to actually start to heal.
Yes, that's why I say most people avoid the deep psychotherapy that they need because of that. You have to face those feelings that you have numbed for so long.
Yeah,
well, it's part of our brain structures. It wants to avoid the pain.
Absolutely.
It's very motivated to avoid the pain.
So Erin and I, we always talk about, the only way out is through. There is no way out. If you want to get to healing, you have to go through the pain, because to get to the other side, there's no back door. So people avoid doing it because it's so much easier to go, I feel nothing, than I feel everything all at once. And now who am I? Now what am I going to do about this? Now is the hard work in front of me. It's so much easier just to shut the door and continue in denial. Because when you're in denial, you can behave however you want.
Oh yeah, years and years people
Yeah, exactly. And then what happens is when you're in denial and you shut down those self-processing regions, so that insula is muted. So your sense of self is very far away from where you are. So you're going to act in ways that don't represent who you want to be and who you are. You're going to keep acting in those ways. And then those behaviors aren't in line with who you are. So you feel really negative towards them, especially you feel so much shame towards them. So what is behind that door gets worse and worse and worse. So you keep acting in denial because you're like, no way can I open that door. I'm just going to keep acting in chaos. I'm going to keep drinking. I'm going to keep doing drugs or smoking and doing all these things to get away from what's behind the door, but you're making it worse. And
because you're building and building and building more trauma, more distress.
Yeah, and you see this with Alcoholics Anonymous. A lot of the quotes you get are people saying, there was so much bad stuff behind me that the only way I knew how to continue was by just to keep doing it. Because they couldn't face it, because they know that the only way out is through. And it's the same here. He doesn't want to face it. So he just keeps on acting in denial. And when he really does start to face it, when we talk about the way he was self-harming, again, it was a really good physical imagery of what goes on psychologically, because it's very difficult to show psychological pain. When, like, for example, when someone is suffering with mental health, you don't see it in the ways you see a bruise or a bloody nose. So it's really difficult to empathize as much, because if you don't suffer yourself, it's so hard to put yourself in that mind frame. When you see something physically, you can go, okay, I can see your pain. So they did a good job of that when he started to show his psychological pain, to show it with the bloody nose and the way he was self-harming. So at least the audience now can kind of grasp the pain and then just see his psychological struggle.
Well, even in the show, we see that Lila started to see that turmoil within Mark because she had been married to him for such a long time, and he voiced or verbalized to her that she essentially didn't know who he is. He showed her a version of himself, but not the entire picture of him. So this is in the third episode. So you can see her pulling away, but also her starting to understand, okay, there's more to this person that I should have known, that he might not have known himself because he'd been blocking everything off. And we see it because he's starting to learn about Stephen, and he's aware of Stephen, but none of them are aware of Jake.
Dun dun dun. And he's quite the character.
Yeah. Again, They didn't touch into Jake too much in the show.
No.
In the comics, Jake is a New York cabbie, kind of that everyman's man. And Steven in the comics is like a billionaire playboy and non-British.
Yep.
So they took some of those liberties, but I think it worked really well for this show, for the story they wanted to tell.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, and they did a good job with Stephen making him scattered, because when it comes to DID, it's often referred to as a scattered sense of self and fragmentation of the mind. And they did a really good job of making him scattered. He was a very kind of all over the place, and he was never still. And you felt a bit unnerved by him because he was unnerved by himself, the way that he would, be on the phone and he's messing with the fish tank, and everything he does is very unorganized and scattered, and it is that scattered sense of self. And they, when it comes to that sense of self, especially because it's in the insula, when I go to do something, my brain will go, is this in line with who I am? And we do that with everything that we do. The food that we pick, is this in line with who I am, what I want? Sometimes you don't listen to it, but we have that feeling of, is this who I am? Everything, our clothes, the house we pick. Imagine how confusing that must be when all of our actions are decided by activating that part of our brain, and it tells us, no, this isn't what you want. What if we can't access that part and we're going, what do I want? I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And nothing is communicating with itself. How confusing must that be, just to make the most simple decision, not being able to reach a clear answer from yourself of, is this what I want to do, before you act? And
or the distress that comes from alters making decisions that the host might not want. So getting a haircut or dyeing their hair.
And there was
it's a very visual
yeah.
representation, and you can even see it between Stephen and Mark of how they keep their hair. It's the same hair, but it's a different hairstyle.
Yep.
The scene when he's reviewing the CCTV camera and he's saying to the security guard, watch, you're going to see something crazy here.
Oh, yes.
The stress that he shows when his reality is not the right reality.
When he looks at the very end picture and goes, that's not me.
Yeah, and it's him, and he's like, that isn't me. You just see pure distress, and it goes back to that inability to process self-referent information. He doesn't know what's going on, and it's the first time you see his identity crisis. I think when you start to see him go, who am I? Is this me? That can't be me. And you start to see a little bit of turmoil there.
There was that moment in that first episode when one of the tour guys said, oh yeah, I'll see you Sunday at 7 for their date at the steakhouse. And Steven being a vegan and him being confused as to, one, he doesn't have that confidence to ask them out, and two, not at a steak restaurant because he's a vegan. And then going to the steakhouse and asking, well, I'll take the steak, not knowing the different types of cuts or the way that it needs to be cooked.
Yeah, I thought that was really nice where he got the steak, because it kind of hints to that there is a break. Now there is kind of a break between these identities. Now it's been so separate. Something is in between. When he ate that steak, it's saying part of the personality and preferences from one altar started to seep into the other. And this started to leak a little bit. And they did a really good job at giving clues, like with the bad British accent. It wasn't quite British.
No, it was created to play the role, because he was a representation of Stephen Grant, the character in the, like, not even a B movie, like a C class, budget movie.
Yeah.
But it was him and Roro's favorite movie as a kid. That's what they played. So of course that's what he pulled to create Stephen.
Yep, and those little hints were done really well. When you rewatch it, you see so many.
You really do when you rewatch it.
How did I not get this instantly? But it's a really good job.
And I like the confusion the show brought even to us as the viewer
Mm-hmm.
at the end of episode 4, where you're invested in the story of, all right, Steven, Mark, Moon Knight,
Yep.
Khonshu, Amit, everything. All right, so we're invested in that, and then it flips it to being in the psychiatric hospital, and you see all of these clues that paints the history of what we've seen.
Yep.
So the fish is there, Lila is there, but she's another patient. There is the Moon Knight action figure. There's the fish there that Mark is put in front of. You're seeing all of these things. There's the landscape picture.
The employees are the people
They
that
actually play the
Yep.
movie too in the background.
Yeah, they played that movie for Stephen Grant. There's a picture of when they went to, was it Sweden, where they went to get the scarab.
Yes, the mountains. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the mountain view in Harrow's office.
Yep.
So it makes you question what I was seeing. Was it all in Mark and Stevens' mind? Is this the reality or not? And then you're trying to piece things together.
It's
Yeah, it was
also
very good.
that part of the show where you finally start to realize that it's not Steven who's the main person.
Yes.
Yeah, they left him behind and he was off the boat. And you think he can't fall off the boat. He's the main character. The main character never dies, never gets left behind. But he gets off the boat and you think to yourself, he's got to get on somehow. How is Mark the one going forward? And that is when they start to move it as what we're seeing is it was never about Stephen, but you feel
About
so
Mark.
attached to Stephen.
Yes, you do.
Because
You definitely
it's
get
how
attached.
cinema is portrayed.
Yeah.
You get attached to that first character that you see.
Yeah.
And in that scene you were talking about, when Stephen kind of sacrifices himself, then falls off the boat, his scales balance.
Yes.
So the scales balance with Mark and Jake, because Jake is unknown. So we only see Mark, and he goes through the gates to the Field of Reeds. And he could have had that paradise in the afterlife.
Yes, he could have.
But he grew so attached to Stephen, where at first he wanted to keep Stephen away, that he goes back to save Stephen, which is kind of that great metaphor for therapy within DAD, rather than kind of bringing everything to a singular point. It's learning to live in harmony with the system.
Yes.
Yeah, and they kept making him go deeper as well. He kept figuring things out and going, right, is that enough? Still not balanced. Oh, okay, we'll figure something. Right, is that enough?
I like that.
It's the metaphor he uses. We treat the symptoms, not the cause. And he keeps going, okay, I've stopped this issue now. Is it done? It's like, no, that's not the issue. What's underneath the issue? And each time he digs a little bit deeper, it balances a little bit more. But when it comes to trauma, the trauma responses often cause shame and negative feelings, which then we have to deal with. And if we don't, they cause behaviors which now we have to deal with. And it becomes so late. It's like we said, the door's shut and it keeps building up. So we're taking piece by piece going, right, is it tidy now?
Yeah.
And you keep having to move more. You think, God, I got to be at the end of this by now. But you got to keep digging and digging and digging. And
that's why trauma work takes so long.
Yeah, he keeps waiting for those scales to balance and looking back. How have I got more? It's that I'm trying to get beneath the symptoms. What's the cause? It's all the way at the bottom. And we go through it with him. We go through that journey because it is so quick. And then it's the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And you almost feel emotionally exhausted as the viewer. Like, what is going on? You don't really know, who do I believe? So they take you on that journey of the emotional turmoil with them.
Because it's as much Stephen going through his trauma as Mark going through his trauma. So it's Stephen and Mark going through the same thing, because Stephen is learning he's not the host.
Yep.
He's the alter. He was created. So coming to terms with himself, because he is a real person. He just lives in a body that is also shared by someone else. So it's coming to terms with that, but also creates that bond that he and Mark has.
Yeah, it's almost like sibling rivalry they've got
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
It feels like sibling rivalry when you can see they care, but
Mhm.
they're just bickering. And
Mhm.
that's what it is. He cares, he's protecting himself, but he also wants the other version of him to stop digging, stop
Yep.
looking, because now you're breaking down these walls that I've built them so high to protect us, and now you're trying to knock them down.
Mhm.
So there's also an element of that when they were fighting for control of the body.
Yeah.
Certainly those early episodes.
Yeah.
And I can think back to my kids. So my kids are young, they're 3 and 6, and they fight over the same toy all the time.
Mhm.
So they're
Mhm.
fighting for the same thing rather than learning you can both play with it.
Yes. Yes.
Or
I think there's even a he won't give it back mention there. Like he won't give
yeah,
me the body back. Like is literally
you know,
just
there was a
like
fear of
child
if
play.
I give him control, he won't give it back.
Mhm.
Yeah, and he was stuck behind the mirror. And
Mhm.
he even asked him, is this how it feels? This is
Yes.
horrible. I don't like this. And again, it's like he's watching his life play out and he has no way to control it.
And he's uncomfortable with that feeling.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's that feeling of just
That
inability.
talks to depersonalization
Yeah,
and
yeah, that,
derealization of that out
yeah.
of body experience.
Yes.
And it's
Exactly.
just that scattered sense of self, but seeing yourself behave and not being able to control it. And that is such a common feeling with individuals that have gone through trauma and they're acting in denial, because denial, it blocks us from what is causing our behavior. So you're seeing yourself act, and there's so much negative turmoil that comes with that and shame that comes with that afterwards, because you think, why did I do that? Why did I let myself? I watched myself do things I didn't want to do when I was just hopeless to stop myself. And him looking at himself through the mirror and
Mhm.
being hopeless to do anything shows that inability to control his own actions really nicely.
Yep. Very nice. Yeah.
So one
Yeah.
thing
Go ahead.
that the show kind of does well, because it plays on this element of servitude. So Mark being a servant to Khonshu,
Mhm.
but it also is a reflection of um, the Jewish servitude to the Egyptians,
Mhm.
because Mark is Jewish and he's serving an Egyptian god and not necessarily having the will that he wants. And it's a nice play on this dynamic because as a kid, Mark was essentially controlled by his mom. He lived his life through fear. And now it also kind of brought this, not that he accepted it, but he was more prone to accept or bring about this type of servitude to Khonshu. Again, Khonshu decided to use Mark's vulnerabilities for his own selfish reasonings.
Yes, he do.
But as we said in some of the talks that we had, Khonshu's a dick.
Yes.
And he's
Not a good guy.
no, but it really shows that he accepted someone that just continues to belittle him, to abuse him like his mom did,
Yeah, it
because
goes
it's
back to that sense
familiar.
of learning. He's
It's
learned this is
familiar
how people treat me. Yeah.
Yeah.
because a lot of people that I work with is they don't attract that type of people in their life. That's not how it works. We don't attract individuals. We accept individuals
And we
because the
seek.
pattern is familiar.
Mhm.
The pattern is predictable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think lots of people will say this is the type I attract. And you're so right. We don't attract people. That's not how social interactions work. We don't stand outside and the milkshake doesn't
Yeah.
bring all the boys to the yard.
No.
We go out and seek people.
Yep.
We look for people that feel comfortable to us. And when we say I attract them, what it really means is I am attracted to. I
Mhm.
seek these people and I don't realize that I seek them. And then it adds to that perception, because when we seek people or we feel comfortable people who treat us the way that we have been treated, it just is almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
Where we go, this is what I expect. This
Yep.
is how people have treated me. Oh, these people are doing the same. Therefore, this is how everybody treats me. And it just is that loop of, this is how people treat me. This is how I seek them. They treat me this way. Now I believe it. And it just keeps and keeps on going.
This is just normal.
Because
This is how everybody treats everybody.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
because what happens,
You
it's
normalize it.
Yeah.
abuse happens in a predictable cycle. So
Mhm.
there is a cycle of abuse, and people can kind of predict when those moments happen. So it gives them a sense of control and security. But as soon as they break that cycle and get into a healthy relationship, a relationship that is not based in this cycle or this abuse, it feels very unnerving for them because they're so used to the other shoe dropping that they're perpetually waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it's been like 2 or 3 years. And I have clients that have been with this person for like 5 years and they haven't blown up at me. And I'm
When's it
petrified
Yeah.
that I won't see it coming.
When's it going to happen? Yeah.
When's it
exactly.
coming?
When's it coming?
Yeah,
Yep.
and it creates a normalization of that behavior, especially when we're young, because again, we're learning how to interpret the world. When someone shows violence or shows drinking or shows really dangerous behavior, we learn that, okay, this is normal. So now we go out into the real world. And when we see that behavior, we don't think this is something I should stay away from. This is something I should be aware of because it's normal to us. So it doesn't really hit that, there's no red flag being waved because we go, oh, of course, this happens. This
No.
is fine. This is normal.
The red flag becomes the not abusive person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Why are they being nice to me? Why
Yeah.
are they
What do
taking
they
care of
want?
me? Why are they being so kind? Yeah.
And especially when it's from someone we love,
Mhm.
because we go, okay, well, they love me. So now they act this way. So we associate love and dangerousness. So when there's love and violence, we go, okay, they love me, so they hurt me. And then when we look for a partner, they love us and we go, okay, so they're going to hurt me. That's fine because I know
That's how that
love
works.
and hurt, they work
Mhm.
together. And when we find someone that they love us and they don't hurt us, it challenges our association. We expect it when it doesn't come and they're soft and they're caring. You can't love me because there's no passion here. There's not enough emotion here because that you love me, so you should hurt me because you're passionate about me. And
Very suspicious.
yeah,
Which is
it is.
Mark
It's
and
suspicious
Lila's
thinking.
relationship.
It
Yeah.
is. It is.
But it also brings about Mark's guilt and everything that happened with Lila's father.
Mm-hmm.
And I often use this quote in therapy is René Descartes. I think, therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
But the transformation of that quote is if I hear something often enough, then it must be true. So Mark got abused as a kid. So he heard so often that he was worthless. He was the cause of the pain. He was the cause of his brother's death. So it means that is true. I am the root cause of this. I hurt people. Then went into the military.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a moment that he talked about what happened in the military, how he became a mercenary, is that he went AWOL on a dissociative fugue.
Yeah.
So discharged from the military, became a mercenary, and then his partner murdered everyone. Again, reinforces that belief that he's a bad person.
He's a killer. Yep.
So he defines himself as a killer, and then Khonshu kind of uses that to his advantage to just continue the abuse.
Yeah, he can't separate his behavior from who he is as a person.
Yep.
And it's sad because we learn these appraisals from our parents. When we are a kid and we behave badly, the parent goes, you're a bad kid. We go, bad behavior, I am bad. And we see it as we grow up. We don't go, I behaved badly or a bad thing happened to me. We go, I am bad. And when we think we are bad, we think we are worthless. We think we are a failure. We think we're unlovable. We think all of those things. And it's not, this is what my behavior said. It's, this is who I am. We
And why
can't
bother
separate.
being anything else?
Exactly. There's no point
Because-
helping me because I can't be helped.
Because kids are inherently egocentric. And again, I said, my youngest is 6, so he's in 1st grade, and he's completely in that state of that egocentricity of everything that happens in my life is because of me. And he does something that is a bad behavior and says, oh, I'm a bad kid. And me and my wife often reflect, no, you're not a bad kid. You're still a really good kid. You just made a bad decision. And really reinforcing, you can still be a good person and make poor choices. One does not equate the other. And when I worked in correctional institutions, that was the type of reparenting that I had to do with a lot of the inmates.
A lot of core
because it's
inner child work.
if I hear something often enough, it must be true. I think, therefore I am. And them embodying, oh, I'm a bad person. Look where I am. I'm in here for murder or attempted murder and whatever. It's like, okay, we learn to understand where things come from. We're not excusing the behavior, but we need to understand that you are not the behavior. You can still be a good person that makes poor decisions. And that's the thing that Mark is also learning, that he made poor choices, poor decisions, but that does not inherently mean he's a bad person. And we see that when he has all of those people that he killed, and he said, I remember each one of them. He holds that to him as guilt, as blame of, I am a horrible person. Look at all of the things that I did. It just proves that I'm horrible.
Self-reinforcing. Like he's just holding it all on so that he can reinforce his own thing.
And Stephen, throughout the show, saying how horrible Mark is of a person, and then that transformation of Mark and Stephen kind of coming together, and Stephen accepting Mark and not seeing him as a bad person, but as someone that is not broken, that just needs help.
Yeah. And when it comes to young kids, they haven't yet got theory of mind either. So they can't put themselves in anybody else's place. So their thoughts and how they think about the world is how they think that everybody else thinks about the world. So as you said, they're very ego driven, or egocentric even. So they can't see that how they are thinking is not how everybody else thinks. So it's, I am bad. Everybody thinks I'm this bad kid. My parents think I'm a bad kid. My teachers think I'm a bad kid. So what's the point? If you've got no one to correct you growing up, say you do bad behaviors and you do go to prison, you've come so far learning, I am bad, I do bad things. But that saying goes, if you're a bad person, bad people don't care about being bad. If it upsets you or unnerves you that you've done a bad thing, you're not a bad person because you care about it.
You ultimately just showed you have a conscience. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why they say, cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the types of therapy that they do try to use with DID, because, that really is all about changing that negative thinking pattern that you have learned over. It's undoing so much. You have to undo so much. So it could, like I said, take quite a while. But I know that is one of the therapies, that they use.
The difficulty with that as well is if you've got different alters, they've got different thinking patterns. So it gets really confusing because you might be doing all this work, and if you don't yet know that it's DID, it can feel like all this work is unraveling, but it's not unraveling. It's that it's now a different, identity that's having these feelings, these thoughts. And if they're not so far apart, either, one doesn't have a British accent, one with an American accent.
Again, creative liberties for media.
It's much
Help the
easier to
audience.
identify.
All right, I'm gonna be the big villain and cut everybody off so we can go to Q&A.
Okay.
Because we've got about 25 minutes, and we do have some from the chat as well as some that we got beforehand.
Good.
So if everybody's thumbs up for that, we're gonna slip on over. Dr. Goku's not thumbs up. Mm-mm.
I was reading.
I know, I'm fine. So I'm gonna go with the ones that we got in the chat since they're here. Has everybody seen or heard of Mr. Robot?
I've heard of Mr. Robot.
Okay.
I have not watched Mr. Robot yet because
Okay,
there's only
I'm
so many
making
hours in a
note.
day.
that's so
I'm making
fair.
note
And
of it.
to be fair, I haven't finished the last season either, so I'm with you.
Ooh.
So Tully, we will get back to your question sometime in the future, maybe.
I'll try to watch it, Tully, especially if it's you that asked it.
Technically speaking, I don't know that necessarily Mr. Robot technically falls under DID, but we can talk about that another time.
Oh, maybe it could be, yeah, another segment.
Yeah, why not? So we're gonna, sorry, Tully, but no dice for you. Go play with the turkeys. We're gonna go to Shane's question next, which was on TV, often people who are depicted as switching their eye colors or other physical characteristics. Does this happen in real life when you're switching between alters?
Eye color, no.
No. Unless you put contacts in.
Well, I mean, you would have preferences in each altar. So yeah, I mean, I would think even if you wake up one morning and you are, I would think most things would be the host. However, if an altar is in the presence, yet their outfit would certainly change. Like we said, accents, food preferences. There's a lot that can actually change depending on the altar that is there. That does happen. Eye color, again, like Sai said, would be contacts, but yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
There's
yeah,
biological consistencies can't
yes,
change because they're
yes.
genetically programmed, but things, body language, just body language can
Oh, alone
completely
posture.
change.
Yeah, demeanor.
Yeah, and someone can look like a very different person
Yep.
with a different posture. It can change everything.
Absolutely.
Especially, when they're hunched over and then they look taller, they look more powerful, and body language is definitely something changes with
hairstyle, like as
Yeah.
Dr. Goku mentioned with Steven and Mark, like just more disheveled versus more pulled together. Yeah, you would definitely see that.
Yeah, and
I've seen and read that muscle tone can change in terms of kind of changing a bit of facial features because of like muscle tonality.
Interesting.
I was gonna say, I would
Again,
assume
it's
the
very
physical.
small.
Yeah, I would assume
very
it's
subtle.
more physical things like how someone stands and their posture over their hair immediately. Like if you have an immediate switch.
I think muscle tone is really interesting though, because the jaw can have like slight changes in the jaw can have a huge effect on the perception of the face.
Absolutely.
And we know when we clench our jaws a lot that they can appear wider. So I could see that having an effect on someone, like a subtle effect on appearance.
I think that one's really cool. So I hope that answered Shane's
Good question, Shane.
This one I think is from Rev. Is there any significance regarding DID and the clutter that we see in Steven's room or his flat? Was that just he's a scatterbrain?
Well, I think
Steven is scatterbrained.
Yes.
He's an academic, and he's so scattered. He has everything everywhere.
Abby, Sai. Yeah. I
go
think
see the other books over there. It's fine.
Well, it reminds me.
Steven.
It reminds me of my thesis supervisor. So really intelligent, brilliant man, but everyone knew his office because it was the chaos of books everywhere.
Stop calling me out.
And we kind of made the joke at school was if one of the shelves breaks and someone's in the office, they're going to get just
pummeled,
like puddled by books. And one of the shelves actually broke, and no one was there, but it was an avalanche in the office.
But it's
maximalism to the max.
Like it's chaos, but when you're the one creating, you know where everything is.
Yeah.
When I was studying,
I listened to her defending her chaos.
No, but it's control.
Yeah, it's controlled chaos.
I would know where all of the things are, and it would be like you see on TV the crazy professors with things on the walls with string connecting things. I did that, and someone could come in and go, "This person needs help," but it was called chaos, and he does have that, and you can see he's very protective over his chaos. So to him, it's a controlled chaos, and I think that one, it speaks to Steven as a personality, but it also does help to visualize how chaotic his
the whole
is.
the whole
But
chaotic
it also
side.
brings that element of discomfort when he realized that someone else was in the
Yeah.
flat. So when Mark hid the cell phone and hid the passport, so seeing that in
Invading his space.
the ceiling, or seeing that the fish that he had was no longer his fish because he
Yeah.
had one fin rather than two fins, and kind of unraveled everything because he knew where everything was.
Yeah. Stop calling me out. Let's move on to the next question.
Hmm.
My bookshelves are not going to break, I hope. Is there any medication that can help with DID?
So they actually say there's not a particular medicine for DID. However, DID is not usually in a vacuum when it comes to mental health concerns. There are a lot of factors like depression, anxiety that kind of overlap. So you could possibly treat, let's say you are dealing with a lot of depression based on the diagnosis, you could perhaps use an antidepressant. However, there's not anything that's going to specifically address the DID issue.
Yeah, in the research that I've done, it's mainly you're treating the symptoms
Yep.
rather than the syndrome.
Yes.
Unlike
Yeah.
something like schizophrenia,
Yeah.
where it is that break with reality where medication do help. But there
Excellent
have
segue.
been elements of using antipsychotics as a way to help deal with the anxiety. So I have a lot of clients that use small doses of antipsychotics as a way to help calm them.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent segue. Next question. Why does DID get misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, and how are they specifically different?
Oh, good one. Well, I know with schizophrenia, it's kind of disorganized thoughts and behavior, whereas you're not necessarily detaching. Whereas, like the dissociative disorders, you're literally detaching from yourself and reality. And I know that is a huge difference. There's so many similarities, unfortunately, like a high suicide rate, delusions, depression, those overlap. Where it's specifically different is, like I said, schizophrenia is more disorganized thoughts. You're not actually pulling away from reality as you are in a dissociative disorder. I don't know if you guys
Yeah.
have anything to add.
So the problem with schizophrenia is, unlike other disorders where it's the outside is disordered, it's the inside that's disordered. And when you look at the brain, they process internal stimuli that is not real as if it was external. So for them, the voice in my head as I speak will be processed by the audio center of my brain the same way that the thoughts that aren't me speaking. So it sounds like if someone is speaking to me, my brain doesn't know if it's real or not because it's processed in the same regions.
Yep.
So with DID, it is kind of the same way. You've got inside the brain, you've got two internal stimuli that are creating different things. With schizophrenia, even though it's different, it's still internal, and they can't grasp which one is them or which one is other people. So it can present similarly or
So
similarly,
there's a
but
lot of overlap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes when someone presents with this fractured self, they will more often than not be diagnosed as schizophrenic
Yeah, at first.
before DID, because DID is so rare.
Yep.
Schizophrenia is still rare, but it's more prevalent than
Yeah.
DID.
Usually the first, and then
Yeah, so they're going to be treated for schizophrenia, and the more treatment goes down, the more we can reduce like initial distress symptoms, we can then start to understand. It's more of a splitting of the mind rather than the auditory and visual and tactile hallucinations that comes from schizophrenia.
Yep. And
But I
when
know amnesia is a big factor because you wouldn't have amnesia with schizophrenia. That is like a big piece that really differentiates the two.
Yeah, and when you're
That's
doing
the big thing.
to kind of ask the right questions to figure it out, for someone who is schizophrenic, it's coming from the inside. They don't know which is which. So it can be very difficult via interviews for them to even give you the information that you need. And sometimes when the output presents similarly, it's like ADHD and dyslexia, the outputs can sometimes present very similar, because the inability to concentrate with ADHD can look similar for the inability to process multiple streams of information with dyslexia. So the behavior there can look very similar, but then you look at other parts of it to piece together what is it that I'm looking at. And it's that amnesia that is the piece that says, okay, this isn't schizophrenia.
Mhm.
So both disorders need, it's not going to be diagnosed in the
Yeah.
first time you see it.
No, I would say they're both
Oftentimes-
complex. Yeah.
Although schizophrenia most likely will be treated in those initial interactions. So someone comes in a full-blown psychotic state, they will generally be treated for that psychotic break, and then diagnosed possibly with schizophrenia, but later on may transform or manifest as DID as people learn more and discuss more and kind of unravel the ball of yarn that can be DID.
Yeah, I think
So-
that's a really nice metaphor though, that ball of yarn.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you know, when you pull headphones out your pocket and you go to just
Oh,
quickly, and the more you pull, the more they get
Christmas lights.
tightened up. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Stupid Christmas lights.
Yeah. And you think, okay, well, I got there now. And then there's more as you go along. And it is really like that with mental
Yeah.
health, that you think it's one thing. You dig a little bit deeper and you realize, okay, well, maybe it's something different.
Mhm.
And the thing with DID and schizophrenia is their ideologies are different.
Yeah.
Whereas DID is majorly trauma driven,
Early childhood
whereas schizophrenia, it's more so genetic.
too.
Yeah.
You have a genetic predisposition and you can develop it naturally, or you can induce it by not necessarily trauma, but by
Yeah.
drugs and stress that
Mhm.
activate what was already there.
Mhm. Particularly going to college is a big one. I know that's why a lot of colleges have an extra counselor there for the freshmen, because that really is, if it is going to come out, it's usually with a major change like that, you know.
But within DID, generally develops from childhood trauma. You're not going to develop DID in your teens or
Mm-mm.
adulthood.
Mm-mm.
It comes from childhood.
But
Yeah,
there was
to protect
research.
yourself.
Yeah, there was research showing that the emotional neglect is the mediator or the moderator even for the changes in the brain associated with DID. So people can have those changes and not have DID, because not everybody that is abused has DID, but the severe emotional neglect that is felt was kind of that bridge between this effect and that effect. So it really
It kind of
is.
needs those two pieces. Like
Yeah,
not everyone that goes through a
Yeah.
traumatic event will develop PTSD. Humans are rather resilient.
Yep.
But some people will develop that PTSD.
Yeah, and you've got to have an underlying genetic predisposition as well. It's the
Yeah.
same as being alcoholic, and people
Yeah.
don't realize that not everybody can be an addict. People can drink and never develop alcoholism.
Mhm.
You've got to have a predisposition genetically. And it's the same with a lot of mental health issues. You can go through the worst things in your life and not necessarily develop mental health in the way that someone else would. And it's that genetic predisposition.
It makes me think of a book. Have you all read Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Richard Sapolsky?
No.
Fascinating book. He has a great lecture on YouTube. It's like an hour and a half, and essentially talks about the early developments of like type A personality and anxiety and everything that comes with it. So they explored and researched ulcers
Mhm.
and how ulcers form, because everyone thought, oh, well, ulcers form with the bacteria. So they gave mice the bacteria that created ulcers. None of the mice got the ulcers. But as soon as they made the mice's lives hell, essentially stopped them from eating, sleeping, created a whole bunch of stress, it created the internal environment for the bacteria to take hold.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you can have that catalyst, which is
Yep.
like the bacteria or the genetic predisposition, but if the environment's not right, so if you live a happy, normal life without that amount of stress, and you still have that bacteria for ulcers, you're not going to develop the ulcer. But if you have that environment, then one kind of leads into the other. And it's kind of that same thing you were mentioning about DID of you can have all of these predispositions, but it might not create that link.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very cool. You guys, I don't know why this popped into my head, but I'm very curious your take on this. This is my question. Do all of you know about Phineas Gage?
Yes.
You don't hear
It's
it.
like psychology 101
Yeah,
when we
right?
talked about Phineas
everyone
Gage.
that
Come on
does
in. Oh, okay.
I'm like,
psychology just
no.
died a little bit inside. Yes.
So he had a massive head trauma. He had a pipe go through his eye and
Oh,
through
I
the
do,
frontal
I
lobe of
do,
his
There
I
you
brain.
go.
do.
I
Yes.
knew you'd
Now as
know
soon
once
as
we
the
started
pipe.
talking
Yep.
about it.
It's
Yeah.
like the study of HM.
Yeah,
Yep.
Just
Yeah.
yeah.
everyone
Yep.
knows. Well, I
Yeah, so
think
everything changed in the frontal lobe and
Yes.
personality.
Yes.
so. It pops up to me as a person not in your guys' field because there's constant talk, even in like a general person's purview, that his personality kind of changed afterwards. And it's just curious because that's what we're talking about is those alters. And I think it was something you had said, Dr. Goku, about how like it's a whole new other personality, it's a whole different shift, and how it's all in the same brain. So for if somebody needs an example that's not quite in all of that academia that you guys have gone through in this area, I think it's not DID, but it is a curious kind of example.
Yeah. So Phineas Gage, essentially the reason why his personality changed was due to that serious head trauma.
Injury.
He had a pipe go through his eye and frontal lobe that damaged the brain.
The Wikipedia has a lovely drawing.
I can
Oh.
I don't
imagine.
want to look at the dreams.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it kind of like harkens to like, you know, where they did electric shock treatment or lobotomy. We are literally
Mhm.
trying to change the brain to change things. And so, yeah, anytime that happens, obviously, you know, you're going to see, you know, an effect.
Because
Yeah.
your personality, while it's anchored within the structure of your brain.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
as soon as there's a tumor, serious head trauma that
Mhm.
happens, that can affect multiple areas of the brain.
Exactly.
Example, as soon as you get a big hit on Wernicke's area, well, language and understanding of language then gets impacted.
Exactly.
I know
Yeah.
it's
So
And like Abby was saying with trauma affecting your brain in early childhood development literally changes how you can
Yep.
do things for the rest of your life. You know, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, we
yeah, with
live
anxiety
in-
disorders, the amygdala is hyperactive.
Mhm.
Generally, it has grown to be bigger
Yeah, literally.
as a response to the danger of the world.
Mhm.
And so from again more of a layman's area, I think we see a lot of people talking about in debates. I like to watch debates because I'm weird, I guess. And a lot of people like to talk about how in certain types of debates you are your personality and that's never going to change. And then there's examples like this. And I think from you guys' standpoint, it might seem a little bit easier to see that your personality can change based on what you were just saying, but the general civilian type might not be able to understand that. So it's really interesting seeing that kind of used in shows and then brought up in debates where you can see people who don't know those little details where how these things can actually be changed actively or how we've done it historically for a very long time.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
because your
really
personality
like
tends
that
to be
point.
anchored.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Go
I
ahead.
like the point though that you can change your personality to a degree. We are who we are at our core. However, the brain changes. We learn and grow through our experiences. That's what maturing is. And I think that it's a really wonderful thing that you can be one person and then a few years later be a different person. Now, usually when people have that bigger change in personality, it's because something traumatic or something big in their life has made them change themselves in a really real way. But when people think, I'm never going to be who I want to be, or that person can never be me, I'm not strong enough, or have thoughts like that, when we look at what the brain can do and the way that it can change itself in every area of the brain, you know, only the hippocampus can change as dramatically, but every area of the brain can change and grow and develop. We are not stuck with who we are. If we are not happy with who we are, we can change it. We can say, I want to be kinder. I want to be smarter. I'm going to learn. I want to be more forgiving. I want to be more compassionate. I want to be X, Y, Z. We can make that choice and we can be that. The brain allows us to do that. And I think that's a really wonderful thing.
I'd be out of a
Yeah.
job if I didn't think there could be changes.
That's really
because I think
fair.
a lot of people equate change to a drastic,
Yeah.
immediate shift
Yeah.
Like a
rather
coal for
than
your
a
eye.
progressive evolution of who
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
are.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's
I think
not
that's
you
very
wake up
fair,
as a
yeah.
different, you don't wake up as a different person tomorrow.
No.
Maybe in 3 years' time, if consistently you make small change, it's consistent. And then you look back and you're like, wow, I'm worlds
Look how
away.
far I came. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, I'm hopping on this
Unless
segue
you're
again.
Phineas Gage and you have a pipe
Yeah.
go
Yes.
through
Yeah,
your,
yeah, yeah.
your
So I'm
frontal
hopping
lobe.
on.
Have that handy.
I'm hopping on this segue that Abby has set up for me unknowingly, which is that a lot of time on social media you'll see like infographics of every 5 years all of the cells in your body have changed and you're a new brain, a new person. So you're in space.
Your hair is
So
curly now. It's not.
yeah. So going with that, why do you guys think this kind of idea, as well as specifically why DID, has become so popular to discuss on social media, such as TikTok, but even YouTube Shorts, especially those short little 1-minute clips that stick with people so much?
Oh, it's like my
Do we have an
serial
hour
killer
to touch on
obsession.
this?
I
We have
know.
4
I
minutes.
think all of
Go.
us are really like holding ourselves back.
We're all like,
We're all
Yeah.
angry. You have 4 minutes.
With what I've been able to read and some of the research that I've been able to kind of dive into, there was a good article on what's his full name? Dr. Robinson from McLean Hospital gave a talk about it. And one thing he mentioned about like DID TikTok was what's called imitative DID, where a lot of people see the behaviors, because DID, again, childhood trauma develops at that age, not something you develop as a teen or a young adult, as a way or a form of malingering, as a way for them to deal with things or get some type of clout or attention or status. And again, this is not to take away from the people that do suffer from DID, because there are, but because of TikTok, it's given a platform. It's shown how many people have it. Again, the prevalence is like 1.5% as of a DSM-5-TR. 1.5% of 8 billion people is still a lot of people.
Yeah, I think another reason is, well, one, we seek to understand that which we don't understand.
exactly.
And DID is something that it's so abnormal. We really want to understand it. So we go out to seek this understanding, and TikTok provides us a simple one. Now, I love and I hate this because my motto is making science accessible. So I think when science is on these platforms, it's great. But the problem is people will confidently present rubbish and make it appear as if they are presenting the science, and then it leads to a misunderstanding because they'll present something very complicated in a very simple format. Things aren't always that simple, and often they don't understand it well enough to present the simple form of it. And then also when it comes to why a lot of the people on TikTok that say they have it really believe that they do, but they don't. And that comes to self-delusion a lot as well, because naturally we seek to understand the world. And one way that we do that to keep up a positive self-perception is we do self-delude. Everyone does it. It's not, you're not a bad person if you self-delude. It's a natural human tendency. So when we're struggling and we don't understand how we feel, and we see someone that presents how they feel and we go, that makes sense, that might help me explain how I feel. We then look at the symptoms and we go, yeah, I have that. Who's looked on WebMD and they're like,
Dr. Google.
I might be dying.
It's
Yeah.
psychopathology
a
class
brain tumor.
101.
Everyone's anger immediately at Dr. Google.
Back to undergrad, when I had my psychopathology class, everyone in our class saying, all right, what disorder am I going to have today?
I have
Because
GAD.
the criteria are so general
and broad.
and overlapping that, again, differential diagnoses are hard
Mhm.
because to make sure that we really understand things. And initial diagnostic impressions generally come from people looking online saying, oh, I kind of relate to this.
Yeah, we also mimic. So it's like when you watch a TV series, it's kind of funny. We take on the personality often of our favorite character.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's intentional, but sometimes we take little traits that they have and we show them in our behavior.
Yeah.
And it's emotional contagion as well as it is of modeling behavior. We look and go, okay, well, this is what I like, this is what I want to be like. We model it. When it comes to mental health, sometimes we can model behavior without realizing that we're modeling behavior. We're seeking to understand ourselves. Someone has given us an explanation. So we self-delude and then we start modeling that. And then again, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We
Mhm.
can actually make ourselves very sick by thinking we are sick because it can release stress hormones and it can make the body react as if it's sick. Like there's a study that I love.
Oh,
That
I have to cut you off, and I'm
Okay.
so sorry because we are at time,
But
and
the study that
I hear
love.
study, and I know that we're going to continue.
Okay,
because I
Erin.
would.
Erin, go. Why do you hate it?
Erin, you're the last of us, and then everyone will run away. Go.
No. I was gonna equate the phenomenon and the excitement of it based on very much serial killers. Serial killers, there are very few of them as well in the world. However, look at the amount of shows, podcasts, everything built on that same
People are
concept.
obsessed.
We seek to understand what we do not know or we are scared of. And so I do think that any extreme mental health disorder gets that same popularity. I just advise people to really seek the correct resources that will be shown at the end of this, the
Yes.
correct resources, and always seek help if you
Yeah.
do feel like you're struggling, as we said all the times that people aren't. However, they really, I mean, if you even have trauma that you need to process, please consider it, for when you are ready.
The thing we always use at the start of our podcast that we really need to start over again is, while we are mental health professionals, we are not your mental health professionals. So the information shared here shouldn't be used as ways to diagnose people, but mainly as for entertainment, education, to further down seeing or seeking actual therapy.
And quick blog plug, we run a series of blogs that aim to educate. In the Doctor's Corner, we take the science of these topics and we communicate them for the layperson.
Yep. Which is awesome. And I think we could absolutely talk for a full 8 hours about all sorts of things, and it would be super fun. But alas, we are at time for our segment. So thank you all so much for hanging out with us and watching Moon Knight multiple times over the past 2 months, 3 months.
Yeah.
It was
Thank
a great
you to
show.
you and Ash for putting this together.
Yeah,
so we have a tie-in, which is our friend Chris Flick donated a piece of artwork to us. So whoever the largest donor is today will be getting this beautiful Moon Knight print that I'm trying to keep the gloss off of. There we go.
Ooh,
yep,
that's a very nice print.
Yeah, Chris is super talented. We wish he was here, but he's at Ocean City Comic Con. So top donation today so far to top is $250 from Jeff earlier today. And thank all of you for being here. And also, Sai, just in your tribute, because you taught me so much, I have hot chocolate in my ILF mug.
Correct and appropriate. Thank you.
So I am gonna first of all thank you all for being here. That went by too quick. We all had questions. We still have questions over here, like our Slack channel's full up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the mental health resources. And then we're going to do a couple of videos, and then we're going to have an Ask Me Anything with the founders of the Innocent Lives Foundation. So, again, Erin, Dr. Goku, Dr. Abby, thank you all so much for being here. And we're going to continue
for having me.
Share your work, right, with these resources that you just discussed.